Around 4 a.m. on August 26, 2008, a huge fire lit up the sky over a quiet countryside home in Maesbrook Village in England. The house belonged to 50-year-old millionaire Christopher Foster, his wife Gillian, and their 15-year-old daughter Kirsty. They lived a rich life: beautiful horses, fancy cars, pet dogs, and a big mansion surrounded by acres of land. But that night, something went terribly wrong. When firefighters arrived, the whole house was on fire. The gates had been blocked on purpose. Someone had fired a gun, and when investigators looked inside, what they found was shocking, and it definitely wasn't an accident. And the most shocking part? The person responsible for it all was Christopher Foster himself. Why would a rich man kill his wife and daughter, shoot the animals, and burn down everything he owned? Stay with me, because this story will shake your understanding of family, wealth, and the dark secrets that can hide behind a perfect life. Welcome to Crime Aura, where the darkest true crime stories come to life. We bring you gripping stories every week, so make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay in the loop. Now, let's dive into today's story. Christopher Foster's road to success was never easy. He didn't grow up in a rich family or have the privileges that often make life easier. Born on July 9, 1958, in Burnley, a working-class town in Lancashire, England, Christopher was the first child of Enid and Geoffrey Foster. His father, Geoffrey, worked as a sales director for a chemical manufacturing company, while Enid stayed home to care for the family. They lived modestly, comfortable, but never wealthy. From the beginning, life was about working hard. In 1962, the family welcomed their second child, a boy named Andrew. The family moved to Wolverhampton, a larger, more industrial city in central England. As both Christopher and Andrew entered adulthood, the brothers followed similar career paths. Andrew worked in sales, moving up the ranks to eventually become a manager. Christopher also went into sales, focusing on insulation materials, but his career was rocky. He moved between jobs often, never finding the kind of success or stability his brother achieved. In 1983, Christopher's life took a new turn when he met Jill, the woman who would later become his wife. They were introduced through Jill's older sister. Jill and Christopher quickly grew close, spending more time together and eventually deciding to get married. They tied the knot in 1987. After marrying Jill, Christopher seemed ready to start fresh. The couple bought a small house in Wolverhampton. It wasn't expensive or luxurious, but it was theirs. For a while, life appeared stable. They were building something together, and things seemed to be heading in the right direction. But that stability was short-lived. Less than a year after their marriage, Christopher lost his job. The company he worked for shut down, and he found himself unemployed. With a new wife and growing financial responsibilities, he was under serious pressure. The stress of job hunting and trying to keep up with bills began to mount. Out of desperation, Christopher began searching for other ways to make money. This difficult period forced him to think differently. He didn't want to return to another dead-end job. He wanted something bigger, something that could give him control and long-term success. Then, something unexpected happened. A tragic accident made national news. It was widely covered across television and newspapers. Most people reacted with sadness or shock. But for Christopher, the story sparked an idea. He saw something in it, a business opportunity that others had missed. That single moment gave him a new direction, an idea that would eventually change the course of his life completely.
Explosion and fire on the Piper platform. All personnel abandoned.
On July 6, 1988, a disaster struck in the North Sea that shocked the entire world. An offshore oil platform named Piper Alpha exploded without warning. It was located about 120 miles off the coast of Aberdeen, Scotland. The explosion was caused by a critical mistake in safety procedures. Maintenance had been performed on both a pump and a pressure safety valve at the same time. That decision proved fatal. Oil began to leak from the system, and when it came into contact with a source of ignition, it triggered a massive explosion. The fire spread quickly and violently. Men were trapped, and the destruction was unstoppable. Of the 226 men working aboard the platform that day, 165 lost their lives. The accident didn't just take lives, it also destroyed a major part of the UK's energy infrastructure. Piper Alpha had been responsible for nearly 10% of the oil and gas production in the region. Its loss was both a human tragedy and an economic blow. In total, the damage was estimated at over £1.7 billion. The world watched in horror as news of the Piper Alpha disaster unfolded. Chris Foster, like many others, followed the story closely. But unlike most people, Chris saw something else in the wreckage: an opportunity. His background in insulation sales gave him a technical edge. He began to think seriously about how insulation might be improved for use on oil rigs, especially around valves and pipe systems where the fires had started. Chris started experimenting with materials that could better protect critical equipment from heat and fire. The goal was to develop a fire-resistant form of insulation that could survive under the harsh conditions found on offshore oil platforms. It was a difficult task, filled with trial and error, but he was determined to see it through. His wife Jill stood by him through this difficult and uncertain period. As Chris spent long hours testing materials and formulas, she handled things at home. In August 1993, they welcomed a daughter, Kirsty Louise. Becoming a father gave Chris even more motivation to succeed. He wanted to build something lasting, both for his family and his future. Chris took a major risk to keep his project alive. He remortgaged their house to fund the experiments. That decision could have cost them everything, but Chris believed in his idea. Eventually, his hard work paid off. After many failed attempts, he developed a special blend of rubber and plastic that could form a tight, protective shell around oil pipe valves. The new material was strong, flexible, and most importantly, resistant to fire. By 1997, Chris had successfully patented his invention. He named it Ulva Shield. The following year, he established a company called Ulva Limited, based in Staffordshire, a quiet rural area in the West Midlands. Jill joined the business and worked as the company's secretary. Together, they poured their time and energy into building something they could call their own. The real turning point came when Ulva Shield received an A1 rating in British fire protection standards. This rating was extremely rare and indicated that the material was fully non-combustible. It meant that the product could be trusted to perform under extreme heat without failing. For companies operating oil rigs and industrial sites, that kind of safety assurance was crucial. Chris's invention quickly gained attention in the oil and gas sector. Large corporations, always looking for ways to reduce risk and improve safety, began placing orders. Ulva Limited began to grow. Chris attended trade shows, spoke with engineers, and marketed his invention aggressively. He knew he had something valuable, and he worked hard to get it into the right hands. The business continued to expand throughout the late 1990s and into the early 2000s. With each new client, the company gained more credibility. Financial success followed. Chris and Jill were now living a life far removed from the modest one they had known in Wolverhampton. The real turning point in Chris Foster's career came in 2003. By that time, his company Ulva Limited had grown rapidly. Orders were pouring in from all over the world, and the demand for his product, Ulva Shield, was far greater than his small-scale operations could handle. To meet this growing need, Chris made a crucial business decision. He partnered with a larger manufacturing firm called DRC Distribution Limited, based in Soham. This move allowed his fire-resistant insulation product to be produced on a much larger scale. The switch to mass production was a game changer. It meant Chris could now meet the strict timelines and bulk orders of major international oil companies. His product was no longer just a niche invention, it had become an industry standard. With this expansion, Ulva Shield was supplied to some of the biggest names in the oil and gas sector. Companies like ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and dozens of others added the product to their safety systems. These contracts brought in millions in revenue. Ulva Limited was no longer a small operation in the Midlands. It was a respected supplier to the global energy market. This was a remarkable milestone, especially for someone who had come from modest beginnings in a working-class town. Chris had turned an idea born from tragedy into a global product. He had climbed from a small house in Wolverhampton to the top tier of industrial innovation. Chris Foster had made it. But behind the scenes, the success brought new levels of pressure. As the business expanded, so did the expectations. He was no longer just managing a company, he was managing a reputation, a growing payroll, large-scale logistics, and international relationships. And with each deal signed, the stakes got higher. In October 2004, Chris Foster and his family made a major move. They left their previous home behind and settled into a grand mansion called Osbaston House. This estate was located in the upscale village of Maesbrook in Shropshire, England. The house itself was worth £1.2 million and sat on an enormous 16-acre property. It had a lake, a wooded area, and several extra buildings around the main house. Inside the Georgian-style mansion were 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a large kitchen, and multiple reception rooms. It also had unique features like an orangery, a wine cellar, and 3 stories wrapped in climbing vines. For Jill and their daughter Kirsty, the house was a dream. They loved animals and turned the property into a kind of mini farm. Ducks and chickens walked freely. Kirsty kept her horses in the stables, and they had several dogs and guinea pigs. It was peaceful, full of nature, and perfect for a family. Chris, on the other hand, focused more on material things. He began buying luxury cars, 2 Porsches, an Aston Martin, a Ferrari, and even bought a truck for Jill and a tractor for the land. To the outside world, the Fosters looked like the picture of success, a wealthy, loving family living in the countryside. But the truth was that much of this lifestyle was built on credit. Chris had fallen into the trap many people fell into during that time, believing the boom would last forever. He thought the money would keep coming in, so he kept spending. He also took up new hobbies to match his surroundings, including fishing and hunting. His interest in guns grew, especially clay pigeon shooting, a sport that involved aiming at flying clay targets. To legally own firearms in the UK, Chris had to go through a long process involving police interviews, property checks, and references. Once approved, he began collecting guns and even practiced shooting on his own property. Meanwhile, Kirsty was thriving in her own way. She loved horses and was active in local riding competitions. Everyone who met her said she was cheerful, friendly, and grounded. Despite her family's wealth, she didn't act entitled. She was simply a bright, kind teenager. She also did well in school and played sports like hockey and netball. Kirsty attended a private school called Ellesmere, which cost around £16,000 a year. To neighbors and friends in Maesbrook, the Fosters seemed like the perfect family. They were well-liked, often attended local events, and supported their daughter's activities. But behind closed doors, things were unraveling. In 2005, Chris realized he had a serious financial problem. His spending had put Ulva Limited, the company he built from scratch, into deep debt. In an effort to cut costs, he made a risky decision. He contracted a California-based supplier to produce his product at a cheaper rate. But this violated his agreement with DRC, the UK company he originally partnered with. DRC had exclusive rights to manufacture UlvaShield. They were left with a warehouse full of unsellable inventory, and since Chris owned the patent, they couldn't legally sell it without his approval. DRC sued for breach of contract and won. Ulva Limited had to pay a settlement, but the payment was made on credit and the company's financial health continued to decline. In December 2005, Chris appeared in court again. This time, he accused 2 former business partners of blackmailing him over a property deal in Cyprus. However, the court found both men not guilty. By 2007, Ulva Limited was drowning in debt. The company owed nearly £450,000 and an additional £835,000 in taxes. With no way out, the business was placed in the hands of administrators. Then in October of that year, Ulva Limited officially went into liquidation. All of its assets were eventually taken over by DRC's parent company. But Chris wasn't done trying. Before the liquidation, he secretly created a new business called Ulva International. He moved the original company's assets, staff, and customers into this new venture. Once again, DRC took legal action. A second lawsuit was filed, and on February 28, 2008, a hearing was held at the Royal Courts of Justice in London. The court ruled against Chris again. The judge delivered a damning statement. He said Chris lacked the basic sense of commercial morality and added that he simply could not be trusted. This ruling marked the beginning of the end for Chris Foster. He had gone from a working-class man with big dreams to a millionaire businessman. Now he stood at the edge of financial ruin, with lawsuits, debts, and broken trust closing in on him. And soon, the world would find out just how far Chris Foster was willing to go to avoid losing it all. Around 4 a.m. on August 26th, a loud explosion woke up the neighbors. A fire had started in the garage. All of Chris's 4 cars were burning. Chris Foster, his wife Jill, and their 15-year-old daughter Kirsty hadn't been seen since the night of the blaze. Their phones went straight to voicemail, and worried friends couldn't reach them. People were confused and scared. Can you imagine your whole family being in that house? Whispers quickly spread. Some claimed Chris was involved in an £11 million business deal with a Russian company. Others guessed the family had fled to escape financial trouble. 12 fire crews rushed to the scene, but they were delayed. Someone had blocked the entrance gates with a horse trailer and shot out its tires. It felt like this was done on purpose, like someone wanted to buy time or make sure no one could get in. The questions kept piling up. Had the Fosters been trapped inside? Did they leave town quietly, or had something more sinister happened? The mysterious disappearance of the Foster family had gripped the nation. As news spread, the pressure on law enforcement grew, and fast. A team of 200 investigators was pulled together, led by Detective Superintendent John Groves, to find out what really happened at Osbaston House. Despite the massive manhunt, media coverage, and reports of sightings as far away as Europe, no one could find them. The family had vanished without a trace. Firefighters did what they could, but the home was destroyed. It was burned down to its frame. Fire crews couldn't search the house because it was too dangerous. The heat and falling pieces of the roof could hurt someone. As the investigation continued, police tried to find answers, but what they discovered only made the story more tragic. Three days after the fire, it was finally safe enough for investigators to enter the ruins. Dominic Black, part of the investigation team, was the first to go inside. He began walking through the blackened debris, snapping photos. Then, something strange happened. He stepped on something soft, like a sponge. It wasn't like the rest of the burned rubble. That soft spot turned out to be the first clue. As they cleared away the debris, they made a horrific discovery. Human remains. At first, they only saw part of a body, but then, just below it, there was another one. Because of their size, investigators thought it could be a mother and daughter, maybe Jill and Kirsty. But soon, tests confirmed it was Christopher Foster and his wife Jill. Jill had been shot in the back of the head, execution style. Near the bodies, police found a hidden .22 caliber rifle. That was the moment they knew it wasn't just a tragedy, it was a planned killing. 2 bodies had now been found, and Jill's death was confirmed as murder. Inside the charred stables, investigators uncovered the remains of the family's beloved horses and dogs. But one question still remained. Where was 15-year-old Kirsty Foster? Then came a major breakthrough. Somehow, despite the intense heat and damage, the property's CCTV footage had survived the fire. What it showed sent chills through everyone involved. The video captured a man walking calmly across the property, carrying a rifle, and then setting fire to the house. The figure was hard to see clearly. As the search continued, one person was still missing, Kirsty. But 6 days after the fire, police found a third body buried deep in the rubble. A forensic pathologist confirmed it was human remains. The body was discovered in what used to be an upstairs bedroom. The physician told them everything. Kirsty hadn't moved. She hadn't even gotten out of bed. She was likely killed in her sleep, never knowing what happened. Her remains had fallen through 2 floors as the house collapsed. Now it was clear what had happened, but there was just one question left. Who was the man caught on camera? Let's go way back to 2003, when the Foster family just moved to their countryside estate, Osbaston House. Chris's wife, Jill, had seen the house in a magazine and just a few days later, it was theirs. For their teenage daughter, Kirsty, it was the perfect home. She loved horses, and the large property gave her plenty of space to ride safely. Chris said it was the best place to raise her while keeping a close eye on her. For Chris, this was a big change in life. He had grown up in a working-class family, but now he was living like a rich man. He hunted birds, went fishing, and spent his time on big private lands. Chris loved showing off his expensive guns. They weren't just for hunting, he saw them as art pieces. He spent tens of thousands of pounds on custom-made shotguns from famous brands like Perazzi, Purdy, and Beretta. He would always say, "They're investments." But it was clear these guns meant more to him than just money. Over time, his love for guns turned into something darker. He kept them all around the house. There was always a gun in the kitchen, another in the dressing room. Housekeepers said they never dared touch them. They simply cleaned around the weapons and said nothing. Chris also started showing a cruel side. He would shoot birds that flew into the barn and messed on his cars. He didn't care if they were harmless or if other people were upset. Jill hated that kind of behavior, but most people just said, "That's just Chris." He was impatient, quick to anger, and liked being in control of everything. One of the saddest things he ever did was to his daughter's dog, Holly, a black Labrador. When Holly started chasing sheep on the farm, Chris didn't try to find her a new home or ask a vet for advice. Instead, he took her to a quiet country lane and shot her. Holly was Kirsty's beloved pet. The family was shocked, but by then, maybe they weren't too surprised. Chris always handled problems his way, even if it meant hurting the ones closest to him. People close to the family started to worry. Even Jill's own father gave her a chilling warning about Chris. He said, "Be careful, Jill. One day Chris might shoot you." No one wanted to believe it, but in the end, that's exactly what happened. On the night of August 25th, 2008, the Foster family returned home from a neighbor's barbecue. At exactly 8:44 p.m., their home security cameras showed them arriving. Kirsty, 15 years old, let the dogs out. Chris, her father, parked the car. Together, they walked into the house and were never seen alive again. Upstairs, Kirsty logged on to MSN Messenger. She began chatting with her friends. One of them, a 16-year-old boy, could see her on webcam. She was sitting at her computer, talking and smiling. Everything seemed normal. At around 11:30 p.m., her father, Chris, walked into her room. Shortly after that, her internet connection suddenly cut out. Her friend received a final text message, "Sorry, Dad turned the internet off." About 45 minutes later, at 12:15 a.m., Kirsty sent one last message, "Night, night. Love you." That was the last time anyone heard from Kirsty Foster. But security footage from the house, recovered from the hard drives, gave one last piece of the puzzle. At 3:10 a.m., Chris Foster was seen walking toward the stables. From the CCTV footage, police saw a man who looked calm and in control. He stepped out of the house holding a rifle fitted with a silencer. At 3:11 a.m., the horses in the stable were still alive, but within moments, they were shot. A postmortem later showed that at least one of the horses had smoke in its windpipe, meaning it was still breathing when the fire started. X-rays confirmed bullet wounds in their skulls. Dogs were seen wandering the yard briefly on the footage, but police believed Chris put the dogs back in the kennel and then killed them, as there's a visible blood trail on the ground. He likely dragged or carried them back. Inside the stable, police later found the bodies of 3 dogs and 2 horses. Christopher shot the dogs in the head. He shot the horses in the head. He shot his wife in the head. Chris Foster then used the same knowledge of fuel systems that once made him millions to destroy everything. He dragged long pipes from his own oil tank and pumped 200 liters of heating oil into the basement of the house. Later, investigators found the melted remains of the hose. It wound through the gates and across the property, ending where the fire had burned it off. Police believe Chris fed the hose through a window, allowing oil to pour into the hall and down into the cellar. Then he set it all on fire. He torched the stables, killing any horses that hadn't died from gunfire. He burned the outbuildings. Jill's pet doves flew off in panic. And then he turned to the house, setting it alight too. At 4:11 a.m., the home's security system stopped recording. The fire had taken over. Flames could be seen from the road. A neighbor spotted the blaze and called emergency services. But it was too late. A week before the tragedy, a letter had been taped to the front gates of Osbaston House. The bailiffs were coming. Chris Foster was losing everything. 4 years earlier, Chris Foster was worth over £10 million on paper, but everything falling apart for him. Chris always bragged about not paying taxes and always say, "I'm above tax." He had this fantastic accountant doing it all, and he said he and Jill could even claim benefits because they were hiding their income. It caught up with him. The tax office started demanding payment. First £28,000, then £37,000, then more. Eventually, his unpaid taxes added up to £750,000. To pay it off, Chris began taking out loans. He used his house as collateral. One loan was £92,000. Another was $90,764. At HSBC, he was overdrawn, first by £177,000, then by £339,000. By 2007, he had lost his company in a lawsuit. That loss added £1.2 million to his debt. Even as his financial life collapsed, he kept spending. In his final year, Chris spent about £80,000 just on shooting events. This wasn't a sudden crash. It had been building up for years. On August 21st, a friend texted Chris Foster to check in. "Yeah, I'm not good," he replied. "Things are coming to a head for me soon." That was the last message he ever sent. There were signs, at least 3 separate occasions where Chris talked about ending his life. As things spiraled, he confided in former business partners about suicide and even made a haunting request. "If I go, please look after Jill and Kirsty." Some believe he thought he was saving them from losing the life he gave them, from watching it all fall apart. 5 months before the fire, his doctor gave him antidepressants. In the final days, he visited a suicide website. By August 2008's bank holiday weekend, Chris is over £4 million in debt. And then he snapped. Chris Foster killed his wife. He killed his 15-year-old daughter. He set fire to their £1 million home, and he died in the flames. Forensic results showed no trauma to Chris Foster's brain, no gunshot, even though a long-barreled rifle with a silencer was found nearby. 4 months later, the funerals were held. Jill and Kirsty were buried together, 2 coffins side by side in the village churchyard. Chris Foster was buried later that day at the family's request. To burn down your entire life over money? Unthinkable. Just when you think crimes can't get any darker, there's a story from Canada that shocked the whole country. You can tap on the screen to watch and make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching. See you on the next one.